Hi, I'm Skipper Chong Warson, and this is the second season of the How This Works show. This is where we talk to 100 people about what they do and their journey, from their first steps to where they are today. I'm talking to Jen Blatz. She's a principal UX researcher at BECU and a significant voice in the field of UX research. She hosts Blatz Chats on YouTube, spelled with two Z's, and co-founded the UX Research and Strategy Group, one of the largest UX communities in the world. Jen, thanks for your time. It's nice to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me here, Skipper.
So I sketched it out in the intro, but what did I miss in terms of your introduction? Can you set the stage for this in what we're talking about today?
Sure. I guess you missed troublemaker, person who rocks the boat. I don't know. Former designer,
Okay.
former journalist. So I don't know.
Okay.
What should I own publicly? I guess is the big question.
That's always the question, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
so we'll get into the specifics of kind of where you started, what your first job looked like, things like that. But is there a surprising detail that you can share with the audience that someone might not guess? Something you're comfortable in sharing?
Something about me?
Yeah.
Something that, well, I think a lot of people know that I am a big fan of wine.
Hmm.
So,
Red, white.
well, that depends
Ah.
on what the temperature is, what we're
Ah.
eating, if we
Okay.
are eating with wine or not. So there's all kinds of things. But yeah,
Okay.
living in California for over a decade really introduced me to various wine regions, and I really got into it. And I'm no longer in California, and I
Hmm.
miss wine tasting so much. Arr! But I really am into wine.
Got it. So let's go ahead and get into the main part of the show. And can you tell me where you were when you first got interested in user research? Tell me how you got started.
Absolutely. So my first, probably, yes, I would say my first UX job
Hmm.
was for a company called VCA, and they
Okay.
own a bunch of animal hospitals across the United States and Canada.
Hmm.
And there was a UI designer, but I was the pretty much the lone UX person.
Okay.
And I was hired as a UX designer. That's what I was back then. And I didn't really understand the field. I
Hmm.
don't have a medical background. I am not a doctor. I had not owned anything beyond a goldfish at that
Hmm.
point. So I didn't even really know animals, to be honest.
Okay.
And when I was designing the software and various apps that the hospitals use, but primarily working on the software.
Yeah.
And so I really needed to go into the hospitals and understand what is that environment like.
Okay.
So I can recall the first time I ever did some ethnographic observation in an animal hospital. I go to the back, and it was shocking to me. I go in the back, and there is this dog laying there on a table,
Hmm.
just an open table.
Okay.
He's got tubes hanging out of his mouth. His eyes are open, and he looks dead. And
Hmm.
I'm like, whoa, what is going on here?
Sure.
And they're like, what? He's under anesthesia. And I'm
Okay.
like, what? They said he's gotten a dental. I'm like,
Okay.
what's that? Like his teeth cleaned. And I'm like, what? Again, never had a
Okay.
cat or dog, had no idea what was going on.
Sure.
You have to knock a dog out to teeth to clean his teeth,
Right.
because you can't tell a dog, hey, open wider, because he's gonna bite you.
Sure.
So I was really freaked out. Like, should I have scrubs on? Should I have a mask on? Thinking about human health, right? They're
Sure.
like, nah, as long as you don't touch them, you're fine. So it was a very different medical environment than I expected.
Yeah.
So it was really fun to go and shadow doctors and to see that environment,
Okay.
because there would be requests like, oh, they just need to go over to the computer and type, type this and that. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
that doctor is using their hands to
Yeah.
hold down that dog so
Right.
it doesn't jump off the table or bite them or pee on them.
Yeah.
And I really needed to be in that environment to understand what those working conditions were. And
Got it.
that is when I got really excited about knowing more about the problem we're trying to solve than
Hmm.
actually pushing the pixels into solving those problems.
Okay. So take me one step back. So you talked about your first job as a UX designer, and that's amazing context. As a dog owner, I think I take some of that for granted that I've learned these things over the years. The current dog that we have is our second adult. It's, the current dog that we have is the second dog that I've had as an adult. So, but how did you get there to be a UX designer? What did you study? How did you land that first job?
Sure. So I come from a long history of design in myself.
Mm,
I
okay.
studied journalism graphics in
Okay.
college,
Mm-hmm.
which specifically was to design magazines and newspapers.
Okay.
So my first job out of college was a newspaper designer.
Okay.
And what I can attribute that first job to, what skills it gave me, was understanding the importance of meeting a deadline.
Yeah. Sure.
Because as a daily newspaper, so I worked on the B section, which is the second section in the paper,
Okay.
and that's the local section.
Yep.
And I would design it. And then sometimes they'd be like, oh, hey, that lead story or that photograph that you were going to use, we're pulling it out. And you need to redo your whole
Right.
news section. And I was
Reflow the
like,
whole
oh
section.
shit, what?
Yeah.
So I did not have a lot of time to rework things. The paper had to come out every single day.
Sure.
I had 11 o'clock p.m. deadline.
Yeah.
If I didn't redesign, there'd be a big white hole in the paper, and that is
Sure.
not acceptable.
Sure.
So I learned not only the discipline of meeting tight deadlines, but also working really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. I didn't necessarily work on the layout side, but I also worked for my city paper as one of my first jobs. And the way that I sometimes tell that story for myself is I had to learn really quickly how to become an expert in some specific discipline by 5 o'clock, which is when my editorial deadline was, right? So I
Yes.
had to line up sources and do all of the writing and all of those things. And that was a fixed deadline. So in order to get a designer like you were yourself once upon a time, all of that content, all of that had to be baked and boiled in.
Absolutely. Now
Yeah.
your deadline was 5 o'clock. My start time was 5 o'clock. I
Yep.
worked basically that second shift.
Yep.
So, oh yeah, your story better be in. And if it wasn't, you were going to hear from the editors and you might even hear from me.
That's
There was
right.
a lot of negotiation going on.
Yeah.
Reporter would come to me and they're like, how many inches, which is the measurement, how long can the story be in a paper?
That's
And
right.
I'd be like, you got 10 inches. And they're like,
Yep.
oh no, but I wrote 25. I'm like, oh no, you better get the scissors out because there's no room for that much.
That's right. If you want me to cut, that's a whole other story.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly.
So, that's a great way to start the story of how you got working as a UX designer and then the story working in the animal hospital system. Catch us up. And I know we're skipping steps along the way, but catch us up to where you are now. What are you working on now?
Sure. So I am now at a credit union, which is headquartered in Washington
Okay.
State.
State. Okay.
And that is called BECU, which stands for Boeing Employee Credit Union.
I see.
Now, you don't have to be a Boeing employee to be a member, and you don't have to live in Washington necessarily, though it's a little easier that way.
Sure.
And this is the first time I've ever worked at a credit union.
Hmm.
I have worked in other financial institutions, and what I'm finding in UX is when you work in finance or fintech or
Mm-hmm.
financial institutions, they're all very different.
Mm.
Really. You think,
Mm.
oh, I've worked at a bank, I worked at Capital One. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
very different than it is working at a credit union.
Okay.
And oh, I've worked at Rocket Mortgage. That's a financial company.
Sure.
Yes, but that's a whole different animal than Fidelity, which is investments,
Sure.
right? So I've worked in a lot of financial spaces, but honestly, I have to relearn that domain, or
Mm.
not relearn, but actually learn that domain every time I start at a new position because it's not the same. Finance or fintech is definitely not the same from institution to institution.
Sure. That's a really good point that not all financial companies are the same. I know that there in the world of finance there are similar regulations that you need to be aware of. Slightly different regulations for credit unions versus banks versus other structures. But that's a really great point. You have to understand not just the specific area in which you're working, but then also that specific place, right? Because the Boeing credit union is going to be different than, let's say, an electric company credit union in El Paso or something. So still there are some similarities, but at the same time, there are nuances to understand.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think the biggest difference is the resources that you have and the size that you are. A
Mm,
large company with 30,000 employees, they could be building their own systems, their
mm,
own loan origination or the starter of the loan, right? They
sure.
might have their own systems. Where a smaller company, similar to where I am now, they might have to rely on a lot of third party vendors.
Mm,
And we have to buy this product to originate our loans or originate our applications. And guess what? It's not ideal and it's not going to look exactly like we wanted it to look, and it's not going to function the way we hoped it would. But this is what we bought, and this is what we have to work with.
sure.
So that's probably been the biggest adjustment for me because I was at larger companies and used to the company built the solution. They knew what
Hmm.
problems they were trying to solve, they knew how they needed to solve it. They had
Hmm.
done research to understand, okay, this is what we need to do.
Hmm.
Where smaller companies don't have the resources or the resources and time or money to invest in building their own solutions. So it feels like a little bit more of, I would say, technical constraints in a
Okay.
smaller environment, which is
Sure.
good or
Yeah.
bad. Uh, but that I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. Well, constraints are constraints, so it's something that you have to deal with. You can't necessarily jump over that fence. So, I wonder what does the practice of doing UX research look like at a company's credit union that is mostly, as you said, you can bank at it if you're outside of Washington State, but in the Washington State area. What does that look like to do UX research?
I'll say I'm in Texas. I am not in Washington,
Oh,
so
okay.
I do not have the opportunities a lot to go and just, hey, I'm going to go down to a branch and see what's going on, or I
Sure.
want to see this firsthand. Like at
Right.
VCA, I had numerous animal hospitals around me. The largest animal hospital in the country was right there. So I could see how problems were solved at a large hospital with a lot of resources, like
Hmm.
water treadmills for dogs to do rehab. I mean, like
What?
crazy stuff that you wouldn't think would be available
Wow.
for cats and dogs, or little 1 to 2 doctor, I call them mom and pop shops, but
Okay.
littler hospitals and the limited resources they have,
Yeah.
right? So being in research remotely, I don't have the opportunity to just go, hey, I'm going to go into a branch and see how this is done. And I think that there is so much reliance on a credit union. It's very community driven
Hmm.
and local sentiment, and
Hmm.
people say, "We love you. You're Washington." And I'm like, well, great. I'm not. So what am I supposed to do out here, right?
Sure.
So trying to communicate that sentiment of you're local, you're accessible into a digital experience
Mm,
is what's really challenging
sure.
because um, it's not the same, but you
Yeah.
want it to be. And you want to be able to be accessible anywhere
Yeah.
after 6 o'clock once the branches close. Things still happen, right?
Yeah.
You can't go run to a branch on a Sunday afternoon. So
Sure.
that is, I think, the biggest challenge is how do we build that community, and not a
Mm,
community in a sense like a meetup group or a community feeling like we're still here for you even in a digital circumstance.
mm. Yeah, the digital touch point is important even if some majority of the business happens in the physical branches.
Right. And if you I mean, I like the idea of being accessible. If you think
Sure.
about what the pandemic did, one positive thing is it threw everyone remote. And now people who couldn't physically work in an office could get a job. And thinking about there are loads of people who physically cannot go into a branch.
Hmm.
Now they can have our services from the comfort of their home. And I
Right.
think that we need to think about, all this return to office and what the impact is that having on people who have challenges physically going into a space?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good thing to think about because we live in a world. I mean, you and I are having this conversation on a video call. So, and you and I have met several times, but I think you and I have made a connection over these video calls that we've had over the last few months. And quite honestly, there's also a way to engage with content. You run a podcast, I run a podcast, and there are lots of ways in which you're showing up in people's ears, on people's screens, in a way that feels very real. And I think to kind of flip that to a user experience lens, then how might a credit union show up for one of their members when it's after hours or something that they're just thinking about, that they need to, they can't sit on the phone and wait for someone to answer them, like they just want to send off something digitally. What does that interaction look like?
Yeah, it's key. It's the future,
Yeah.
honestly. I'll be honest, a lot of the people who are members of a credit union are of an older demographic and
Sure.
maybe not digitally native, maybe not digitally comfortable doing business banking, certain things, right?
Yeah.
But younger generations are more comfortable with selecting a bank that doesn't even have a physical branch. They're
Sure.
like, I don't need that. What do I need to go to a bank for? I can do
Yeah.
everything I need on my mobile phone.
Yeah.
And as older people die and younger people come in, we need to be thinking about how are we going to cater to those changing times and changing needs.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the questions that we're exploring is how might we be more digital first for those who want that service. There are people who physically I can't go to a branch.
Sure.
I'm in Texas. I have
Sure.
a friend in the Netherlands who he's a member and he's like,
Oh.
how do
Yeah.
I go to a branch over
Sure.
here? You don't.
Yeah. Yeah, the remote paradigm I think is really interesting because it unlocks many other kinds of people who can utilize a service, which I don't think is something that was thought about very deeply before the pandemic.
Right. The pandemic forced us all to instantly change how we worked.
Yeah,
And I think it helped with that research aspect
yeah,
because I was doing a little bit of remote interviews and testing and whatnot,
mm-hmm.
but at the pandemic, it was like you had no choice.
Right,
So I think participants were getting more used to that interaction, and us as researchers or the designers who conduct their own research were getting more comfortable with that. And I think that I mean, how great was it that now I could talk to people from all over the country?
yeah,
When the pandemic hit, I was at a pretty national company. I now can talk to people all over. I don't
yeah,
have to be popping down to the local office or finding locals in my neighborhood or vicinity to talk
yeah,
to.
yeah,
And it really broadens your perspective. So many parts of the country have different values, different norms, different expectations. And I know, like at Capital One, the branch that I worked at was auto loans, and they did a
mm,
lot of research locally in the Dallas area. Well,
mm-hmm.
buying a car in Dallas is going to be very different than buying a car in San Francisco
Sure,
or
sure,
Chicago or New York.
yeah,
Different needs, right? So you can't base all your experiences on just one geolocation.
yeah. Yeah, there's lots of different needs. And then you factor in a bunch of different kinds of people that show up in those geographies, right? Just because you're in the greater Dallas area doesn't necessarily mean that you conform to maybe some Dallas stereotypes or class attributes, things like that. So,
True.
Jen, do you have a at BECU? Do you have a team? Are you working sort of solo as a UX researcher? Can you
Yeah,
describe
that
what your sort of like working paradigm is?
yes, that's a good question. We have a small team
Okay.
of about 20 UX folks,
Okay.
and five of us are, is it five? Yeah, five of us are researchers, and the
Okay.
rest are product designers.
Okay.
So we have a manager of UX research,
Okay.
and then there are five of us under that manager.
I see.
And generally, it's a consultancy model. It's a not embedded, but distributed for a project or an initiative. We're not. There are two designers who are constantly embedded in a pod in a
I see.
product,
Okay.
but the rest of us are kind of farmed out, I guess you could say,
Right.
for whatever initiative we're needed for. And that could be short term, like a month, or it could be 6 months,
Sure.
or it could be a year.
Yeah. So just depending on the priorities of the business, what needs to be addressed, what's at hand.
Yeah. And there's
Okay.
pros and cons to that. The
Yeah.
good thing is I'm learning about a lot of different aspects of the business,
Yeah.
right? I'm currently working on onboarding, digital
Okay.
onboarding. What does that
Okay.
look like?
Yeah.
And how does that vary from onboarding within a branch? And how do we get more people comfortable onboarding online?
Yeah.
And I'm talking after they've been accepted, your
Yeah.
application is in, you're all good. What are next steps?
Yeah.
Because we're not great at that. So we're working to improve that process. And so that's one way I'm really deep into what's onboarding these days. That's kind of top of mind.
Yeah.
And I've been on different other initiatives. So the cons, I'd say, is you don't really drive that whole process.
Mm.
Usually you'll do the little bit of research, you do a little
Yeah.
information
Just like a
informing
discrete
that.
piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the initiative goes on without you,
Yeah.
and you are put on the next assignment. And
Sure.
so you can't be like, whoa, whoa, wait, where are you going with that? No, no, that is not what I said to do.
Right.
Wait, come
Right.
back. So
Right.
you don't get to sustain that relationship and that influence through implementation. And I think
Yeah.
that's the flaw of a distributed model is you don't get to see it through to the end.
Yeah. The nature of the engagement becomes very contained, and then it's not as though you're leaving the company, but if you're moving on to another focus, then not only yourself but then whoever else is working on it from the product side, from the technology side, when they move on or they continue on through the process, they may not have the same access to you, to the information, to your context that inform the thing that you have stood up and said, this is what I think we need to do. So I do think, to your point, when you cut people off, that sounds and feels very efficient, but you still get a little bit of that brain drain, even internally, when people begin to focus on other things.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think about it as a researcher, I think about how we do a summary report, right?
Yeah.
And that might be 20 pages. Here are the
Yeah.
highlights. But oh man, all the nuggets I couldn't put in here, all the things I didn't share, all
Yeah.
the things that you will never have access to because you don't tap this little brain for,
Yeah.
like, well, what else? Because there's always so much more. Executives love the high level. Ooh, what's the big stuff?
Sure.
But practitioners are like, wait, I need the meat and
I need the
potatoes. I need the
details.
real stuff.
Right.
That's how you make decisions.
Right. Right. And I think decisions that make a difference, right? Because details matter. It's not about the high level. And especially when you're dealing with the onboarding experience for something like a credit union, if you've already been accepted, and I assume that means like all the disclosures and all of that stuff has been taken care of, but now it's a matter of making that person, that new customer, feel warm and included in that thing that you said in the community, whether it's a credit union community or it's a medical facility, or whatever the
Yeah, the
paradigm is.
product.
You
Mhm.
want them to feel included, and that's hard to do on a high level summary.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
really, what does that look like? Because they want, okay, what's the number one thing that every person is joining a bank for? And I'm like, no, there is not
Right.
one reason.
Right.
Sorry.
Yep.
But if we kind of get that understanding, I'm here to put my paycheck in here and that's
Sure.
it.
Sure.
Don't sell them a car loan. Don't
Right.
push a mortgage on them, right?
Right.
They're not here for that. Maybe later,
Right.
you can check in later. Hey,
Sure.
are you gonna buy a car? No?
Right.
Okay. See you later.
Yep. Yeah. Don't be
I
careful
think
where you apply
real
the
I think real for-profit banks are very aggressive in selling, get my credit card,
yeah.
get your loan through us, personal loan, consolidate that debt.
Yep.
And from the research I've done at several financial institutions, that that sentiment comes off really businessy and
Yeah.
icky. And
Yeah.
that's why I think people are attracted to a credit union
Yeah.
is it's a co-op, right? You're a partial owner
Yeah.
of that financial institution.
Yep.
So you get better rates on credit cards,
Mhm.
lower rates on credit cards and higher
Mhm.
rates on CDs and that sort of thing. But it's not so aggressive like, oh, we need everyone to have 4 credit cards. It's not that bad.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about your daily work at the credit union and what that looks like. Zoom out for me and talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing right now in the world of UX research at large. Because I imagine that some of the things that we're talking about in the microcosm of BECU also are happening in a much wider context in other fields as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's this little thing called AI. Maybe you heard about it.
AI. Remind me what that stands for again? I don't remember.
Actual, I don't know, actual shit. No, wrong letter. No, artificial intelligence. If
That's
it
right.
used to be, there was this idea of sprinkle UX on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever that was, right? Wait,
Yeah.
wait, wait. Ooh, we got to get UX on this.
Right.
Now, I feel like the big buzzword, it also used to just be called technology.
Right.
Now, everything is AI, which is, oh, don't get me started on how stupid everyone is latching onto AI as if it's air. Like, oh my
Sure.
God, AI, I need it.
Right.
So I'm seeing this everywhere. I've been doing a few experimental, silly Blatz chats videos where
Mm-hmm.
I am playing around with AI and using it. I did it for desk research, secondary
Mm-hmm.
desk research.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of using Google, I used a couple of tools, Perplexity and ChatGPT to do some secondary desk research
Okay.
and the pros and cons of that. And I was also using it. There's a tool called Adobe Firefly, which is to generate images. You put a prompt in and generate images,
Yeah. Gen
and that
AI.
has some interesting results.
Mm-hmm.
Some work, some don't.
Yeah.
So I think the key here, and you've probably heard this too, Skipper, is you have to know when it's shit.
Mm.
You have to you can't just take it at face value.
Yeah.
I was talking with Joe Natoli a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned AI, and he said, think of it as an assistant.
Mm.
And I like that.
Mm.
Think of it as like an intern. If you have an intern at your company and they're working on something, you're not going to take what they do at face value.
Sure.
You're going to check that
Sure.
before it goes to executives and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to be careful of just taking it out because it's faster and just running with it.
Yeah.
And so I see this getting worse as it's, oh, those 4 times it was perfect. And
Right.
by the fifth time you're like, no, it's all great. And then you don't check.
That's right.
And you're like, like somebody posted on LinkedIn the other day, it was a photo of a bed.
Mm.
And did you see this?
I didn't
I'll
see
have
this
to find
post.
it for
Tell me
you.
about it.
It was a photo of a bed. It was like a store, like
Mm-hmm.
selling a bed,
Mm-hmm.
but the bed itself was wood.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
like it had blankets on it, it had shelves around it, but the bed was wood. It's like, didn't you even look at this? So they probably had produced images a lot of times. Oh, yes, this bed looks great. It's
Sure.
great. We'll just use this and that. And then, like, by the sixth time, they're like, oh, it'll be fine. And they
Yeah.
didn't give it a closer look.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to be careful. of not double checking the outputs that come out of AI.
Yeah. Yeah, plus one to that. A really small example, I dropped a couple of the episodes of the podcast into Notebook LM, which has been really good for summarizing video and some of the audio that I either find or that I make for the How This Works show. And I asked it just to give me, on YouTube, there's that summary of here are some topics and here are the time codes. I thought that Notebook LM should be really good at this, right? It has the video, it's been on YouTube for a couple weeks. It should be able to do it. And in a 55-minute video, it gave me time codes all the way up to 24 minutes, saying that 24 minutes is when the episode ended. And I responded back to Notebook LM and I said, but this video is 55 minutes long. How did you end, you as the machine, how did you end it at 24 minutes? And the answer was funny. The response was, well, I can stretch it out, or, you know, I can reconstruct it to stretch it out. And I'm like, but that's not the accurate time code. So I don't understand. So to your point, I think we always have to have we're human beings, but I think we have to be really skeptical about what AI makes and produces for us, because I think if we put too much trust in it, it's like sending the intern off to make really big decisions and just implement them without anyone collaborating and working with the outputs or the process or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I know a lot of people are using it to summarize and
Sure.
review transcripts and whatnot.
Sure.
And so I tried that a little bit in one of my videos too. I
Mm-hmm.
had already I did the secondary desk research, pulled it from GPT, pulled
Mm-hmm.
what was relevant because there was
Yeah.
some things that were not. And then I put them into Mural, the digital whiteboard that I use, and I just downloaded all the data.
Okay.
Now, the funny thing was when I downloaded it, I know Mural has AI tools, but it's turned off for us, so I can't use it. But
Sure.
when I downloaded all the sticky content, it put it in random order. It didn't
Mm.
put like, here was the header, here were the 5 points under that. And I
Mm.
was like, whoa, shit. Oh, well, I'm going to put it in anyways. I don't have time to clean up. I think I had like 800 data points. I
Sure.
don't have time to, reorganize that.
Sure.
And I put it in and I said, okay, I put it into Claude and I
Mm-hmm.
said, give me a summary report of the executive summary. And gave it the prompts of what I was doing. And and I had an hypothesis. This is what I was going to put in a report, right? I didn't
Mm-hmm.
tell it that. I was like, okay, here are the three main things I'm going to do in a
Mm-hmm.
report. Let's
Mm-hmm.
see if it matches that. And it did some, it did not in some. And I was
Mm.
like, all right, you brought some things up that were interesting. I may not have considered that.
Mm.
I might consider that. And you missed a few that I'm going to have to supplement because you didn't get that.
Mm.
And so I think of it as almost like a collaborator. Like,
Mm.
what are you taking from this? What are the big things? And what would I take from this? And it gets me to think again. Like, okay, I hadn't considered that,
Yeah.
but you're still wrong. But thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Sure. I love that reframing of it, that thinking of it as a collaborator and also saying, yeah, I don't think that's right. So I'm going to continue and explore another area, right? Or pull out some other points. And like you said, some of the outputs that happen, and I don't care which large language model you're talking about, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude, which is my personal LLM of choice, or Notebook LM or Gemini or whatever it is, you still have to look at the output and you have to, I feel like you need to check it in order to make sure that it's pulling out the things that are also important to you. So, yeah.
Exactly. I could not agree more. And I think that's something that people aren't going in with a hypothesis. They're not going in with a plan.
That's right.
Like, I know what I'm going to cover.
Yep.
Let's see how close you are to that. Let's see if you give me more, or
Yep.
let's see where you're off the mark.
Yep.
And I'll use GPT or Claude or different tools for helping with YouTube content,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or conference talk content. And I'm
Mm,
like, here's my outline,
sure.
flesh this out to a 40-minute talk. Well, it
Yeah.
doesn't do that because it
Right.
doesn't give you that much. Trust me on that. But
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's an example I haven't really thought of. I'll use that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's one point and I'm going to have 5 things to support it,
Yep.
1 or 2 might be from them, 2 to 3 are still going to be from me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but they're not in my head. They
Yeah.
don't know what I'm really thinking about when I devise this in the first place.
Yeah. So, in your own intro, you mentioned being a troublemaker. And I want to sort of switch gears a little bit because I feel like you're right. AI, I think, is the hot buzzword right now. Pro, against, we could talk for the rest of the hour about AI. But I
Yeah.
want to talk about something that you have a standing beef with, and this is personas. I've heard it on your podcast. I've seen you write about it in posts. I've seen it on LinkedIn. Would you break down, and a lot of our listening audience are product and design people, but there are also people who aren't. Would you break down what you mean by personas versus, other types of demographical outlines?
Sure. Yes. I do not love personas. My name is Jen Blatz, and I do not love personas.
Love it.
And I have built personas many times for years, and
Sure.
I know how to build personas. That if
Right.
anyone's thinking you just don't know how to do it, yes, I
Mm,
know Alan Cooper's and Kim Goodwin's method and
sure.
plotting on a scheme. I know. Trust
Yep.
me, I know.
Yep.
So the problem with a problem with personas is us UX folks think
Mm,
of personas and they should contain goals, pain points,
mm-hmm.
needs, motivations. These are great things to help inform product design,
Sure.
not age, gender, how many kids you have, what car you drive, what's your
Sure.
favorite candy bar. If I'm
Sure.
designing an app to help you create or fill out a loan for
Mm-hmm.
a credit card, I don't give a shit how many kids you have or what kind of car you drive. That has nothing to do with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when executives think of personas, they think of marketing and
Yep.
they think of those demographic, stereotypical
Yeah.
items that generally they have been seeing in either marketing or business personas.
Yeah.
I've made personas and they're like, "Well, what age is that person?" I'm like,
Mm,
"It doesn't matter." And they're like, "Well, you need to put an age in there." And I'm like, "Not going to happen because it does not matter."
yeah.
And so let me ask you, Skipper, I love this example. And be honest, when I say to you, describe a VP of a bank,
Mm.
what right now, what popped into your head? Tell me what you think of.
So what popped into my head is um, a woman wearing a business suit, uh, maybe carrying a laptop or tablet, who is rushing from meeting to meeting and packed. Like if I looked at this person's calendar, it would just be meeting upon meeting back to back.
Describe what that person looks like because you have an image in your head.
I do. So I think they have dark hair. I'm biased. I'm half Korean, so I see a lot of the world through being a Korean's viewpoint. So I actually see that person as Asian, maybe someone who even resembles Julie Zhao. Um, that's what I think of.
Okay. So that's interesting because you have that lens,
Hmm.
right? And there are probably traits that you assign to someone of Asian or Korean descent
Sure,
that other people don't have that lens,
for sure.
right? And probably positive, maybe some negative
For sure.
also,
Yeah.
like overdriven,
Right.
ambitious,
Yeah.
workaholic.
Yep.
So somebody, a VP at a bank, might have those traits.
Yep.
Other people I've heard say, old white dude drives a Cadillac,
Sure.
And so think about, okay, you're thinking about some old white dude who drives a Cadillac. What else do you think about that person, right? The stereotypes that flood
Yeah.
your brain
Yep.
when you think about those physical traits of a person.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
that how they use a product, those things might slightly influence.
Right.
But I know loads of older people who are very digitally savvy,
Right.
way more so than younger people. So
Yeah.
that's what the problem, one problem with personas is they are too laced with stereotypical data that is not important to a product be or feature being built.
Sure. Would you give that example? You do it in your scenario alignment canvas video, where you give the demographic information for two different kinds of people. And
Yes.
as you go through them, it turns out that you're talking about two different people and not one kind of person. Would you
Yes.
walk us through
So
that
the
example?
example I use is Donald Trump
Mm-hmm.
and Sylvester Stallone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they both grew up in New York, married the same number of women,
Mm,
are business entrepreneurs.
mm,
I think they have the same amount of children as well.
mm-hmm.
They are the same age. They were born the same year.
Mm.
Donald Trump and Sylvester Stallone.
Reality TV star, I think, is one of the other.
Right,
Yep.
right. They're both that. You're
Yep.
right. How different
For
could
sure.
those two be?
For sure.
So if we just focus on demographics
Yeah.
and those common traits, but their needs when it comes to being a person
Yeah.
or what their goals are completely different.
Completely different. And we'll make sure as we're having our conversation, there'll be links in the show notes so people will be able to access this information. I've seen similar treatments of Ozzy Osbourne and Prince Charles. That's
Yes.
another common one that I've seen. So for
Yes.
sure, demographics do not mean the person. And I think to your point, what are their goals? What are their ambitions? What are their pain points? What are their desires? What are their needs? That feels much more rich to me in terms of how can we then work on a product or a service that might serve that person.
Yes. Now I'm going to be the troublemaker that I am.
Yes, yes.
And go a little bit further of why. Okay, so we're forgetting marketing personas, they're
For sure.
trash, blah.
Yep.
Let's just focus on the problem with UX personas and
Mm,
thinking about, okay, we have this general person and we generally know what their needs and their pain points and their goals are.
hmm.
And I've seen this so many times with product and UX designers. They're like, but how do I translate that into my feature that I'm
Mm,
working on?
hmm.
Somebody wants to be financially savvy. Well, what the hell does that mean? What I need details to help me bring this down to a feature implementation level. So I think that's another problem is personas are kind of way up in the sky a little bit. Their altitude is too high to
Hmm.
actually make product decisions.
Okay.
And so I kind of was inspired by Indi Young's
Hmm.
approach of focusing on a scenario, a
Mm,
person doing a thing. When you really thinking about a person who's trying to do a thing,
hmm.
then you can solve problems. So
Yeah.
she gives a great example of a person, two different people who are going through an airport. It's a business person who comes to the airport every single week, travels by themselves, overnight flight, and again, very familiar with this airport because they do it every week. And
Yeah.
then you have a mom with three kids and they're going to grandma's house. Now, okay,
Mm,
I'm focusing a little bit on the demographics here, but it's really
sure.
about this person going to grandma's house
Right.
doesn't come to the airport
Right.
ever. This is
Right.
like maybe this is their first time with
Yeah.
this many kids in tow. And what is that experience like for that person who has a bunch of kids in tow in a very unfamiliar environment, stressful, littles running around versus that business person who's like, bloop, I know exactly where I go to eat my lunch and be at the same gate. How do you design solutions for those completely different scenarios?
Yeah.
So that's the level, bringing it down, making it more specific. Those are the levels that you can solve problems and implement solutions at. Now,
Yeah.
granted, that's a lot more work, right?
Sure.
I've got to think about all the different scenarios that happen in travel,
Yeah.
but you'll actually solve a problem versus I need to get to my destination. Well,
Right.
no shit.
Right.
Everybody does, but
Right.
what are those nuances of your experience that we need to take into consideration to actually solve that problem for you?
Yeah. What is that job?
Exactly. It is very similar to jobs to be done.
Sure.
I'm big fan of jobs to be done and think about that. But it's not a job to be done. It covers a lot of
Yeah.
facets, right? When
There's
you're
a lot of
mapping out
details
the
in
whole
there. Yep.
job. Well, this
Yep.
is even focusing on, okay, I get the whole job, but we're focusing on this little part of it
Right.
and really understanding that and really trying to solve for that.
Yeah. So how does this tie into something that you've created, which is called the scenario alignment canvas, um, uh, the SAC framework? How does this tie into that idea in terms of how then to categorize the scenario that the parent with three kids rushing through the airport and the single person who's catching a or a flight for business purposes, like how do those things play out in that arena?
Yes, good question. Thank you. So, yes, the serial alignment canvas, or I call the SAC,
Mm-hmm.
is a workshop place
Mm-hmm.
that does a few things. It gets the team to work together to collect the knowledge in one place.
Mm,
Now, I kind of think of it as a kickoff document too. It's like, all right, tell me all the things that you know.
yeah.
But we're focused around this one scenario. So
Yeah.
let's say we picked one of those, the business traveler who frequently goes to the airport and and it focuses on kind of three categories. So that person who
Mm-hmm.
travels to the airport quite
Mm-hmm.
frequently,
Mm-hmm.
what are their goals and what are their motivations while they're in that airport?
Yeah.
Really fleshing out like what's happening. And then a little finite, what are their needs and what are their tasks
Mm-hmm.
when they're in that airport,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then finally, what are their pain points?
Mm,
And so these are the same pieces that you see in a persona, or I think of this as a starting point for a proto persona,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what I love about this SAC is we have conversations,
Mm-hmm.
people fill it in, and I
Mm-hmm.
say, let's say somebody said, this guy needs to have 4 beers because he goes on before he goes on a flight because he has anxiety. And I'll be
Mm,
like, okay, what data do you have to support that?
mm.
How do
Okay.
we know this is true?
Yeah.
And ask these probing questions to surface assumptions
I see.
and to say, hey, should we do some more research on that? Should we
Right.
be closer to competence
Yeah.
on this?
Yeah.
And it also helps me as a researcher or the UX person determine where there are gaps in knowledge and confidence
Yeah.
and what we should go research further.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And not to beat the persona horse, but the SAC framework is not a UX persona. It's definitely not a marketing persona, though it can inform both of those pieces. And it's also not a market segment, right?
Right, because market segments are to sell things to people.
Right.
User experience personas are to solve a problem
Right.
or to work on a product. We're not,
Right.
when we make UX personas, we're not trying to sell our product, we're
Yeah.
trying to make it, trying to build it, right?
Yeah.
Marketing is about selling and getting
Yeah.
customers and acquisitions and things like that.
Yeah.
So, yes, I agree. It could be a foundation, a
Mm-hmm.
starting point of a proto persona because it does have the same elements, but a proto persona, and sometimes that's all you have, right?
Mm,
Sometimes it's all you have, but if you get the team to work together and to think about these assumptions
mm,
and okay, yeah, because when I say, do you have, where's the data to back this up? Guess where
mm-hmm.
it is? Nowhere. Because they don't know he needs 4 beers to get on that flight
Right.
they don't know.
Right.
So it's also good to level set on how we could do more research. Because I have been in circumstances and meetings and I'm like, hey, what questions do we have? What do we
Yeah.
need to learn?
Yep.
And they're like,
I don't know.
I don't know.
Right.
We feel really good about stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of getting them a little bit into the weeds of, well, let's really make sure we
Yeah.
have confidence around this.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could pull one thing out, bridging it from what we talked about with AI, I think that one of the themes that I'm hearing and what we're talking about is that as humans, not only use our own internal processing, common sense, does this track, but then also leverage the people on your team to say, hey, let's talk about together, what does this mean? Do we need to go back and talk to someone more deeply about this and figure out what the motivations are? Is this a significant thing that we see over and over? And then I think about something that Teresa Torres talks about in her work, which is just because you talk to someone and they say something is true. So difference between the team and then a potential customer or someone like a customer. And the example that she uses in her book, Continuous Discovery Habits, is shopping for jeans. A lot of people will say, oh, I only buy jeans based on fit. And then you dig into it a little bit more and you ask the question, like a very specific time question, which is, tell me about the last time you bought jeans. Oh, the last time I bought jeans, they were on sale. Or it was this brand, or I like this color, having little to do with fit or less to do with fit than they said in the beginning. So
Yeah, that's a classic phrase. Believe what they do, not what they say.
yep, for
And
sure. Yep.
I'm as harsh to say people lie, and maybe that's a little extreme, but
Right, right.
there's a lot of biases that go into conversations and research too.
Yeah,
Pleasing bias, and they want to look good, so they're
yeah,
not going to acknowledge, hey, I actually bought them when I was on sale versus, oh, they look
right.
really good on me. So keeping that surface level protection of looking good is there, right? But that's why I love the tell me about an extreme time or tell me
Mm-hmm.
about the last time or a
Mm-hmm.
recent time,
Yep.
because then you're like, oh, mm,
The
that's
practice.
not what they said.
That's right. That's right. Um, so let's look towards the future, and how do you think UX research will evolve in the future? Do you have any particular concerns or hopes? We've talked about AI a little bit, but are there other things that you're kind of seeing on the horizon?
Yeah, if I could predict the future, Skipper, I wouldn't be sitting here.
For sure, for sure.
No, no, no. I that's a very good question. I'm concerned,
Yeah,
honestly. I'm concerned with the layoffs of all UX folks and
yeah.
technology folks and the reliance on AI to replace those critical thinking roles, because it that is a huge mistake.
Mm,
So I will say, I am going to throw this prediction out that it's related to UX design. I
mm,
will say I think the role of a design system designer or creator is going to go by the wayside,
mm.
and tools like Figma will just be able to create a full design system for you based on a few prompts that you give it.
Yeah,
Because every website app has buttons and checkboxes, and there are so many components that every design system has. So I feel like that's going to be really automated in a sense, and the code's going to be built behind it. That design system creators, I think, are going to really take a hit because it's going to be so standardized with just a few, like I said, prompts to customize. Okay, we use this color, we
yeah,
use this font, and with a few tweaks, it's going to just spit out a design system. If you think about a company like Figma that has access to almost everybody's design system on the planet,
yeah,
I feel like they're going to use that to feed um, some sort of system to just like generate it for me. So
yeah.
that's one thing I see AI taking over, or whatever technology, whatever the hell you want to
Sure.
call it.
Right.
I see that. I also see there's a trend a lot of people talking about, and I've also thought about this, and there's a migration of UX researchers moving over to product owner roles.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And I can see that happening more.
Yeah,
There's a lot of overlap in skill set. I mean, quite frankly, researchers are sick and tired of being ignored and just not having the influence on the product in the end. So they want to go over to the product owner side and be like, F you, I'm going to call the shots now, and I'm going to do it data informed,
Yeah.
not feature roadmap meeting.
Sure.
So I think that there's going to be a migration or what's the word? Combination of that
Mm-hmm.
role.
Mm-hmm.
That, and if that is the case, we will lose the number of researchers that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Well, one thing when Jen, you were talking about your team, it actually makes me really glad that on your team you have discrete researchers versus like those sort of combo or hybrid roles. And while I think it's important for many people to be involved in research, I also think that you need to have that focus and direction and have a or multiple researchers on your team, because one person can't do all of the work and shouldn't do all of the work, because then you end up pouring all of that information into one person's head, and you don't have that notion of collaboration. But then number two, there's also that idea of cross pollination, which I think that you're talking about, in terms of researchers also working in design or leveraging AI tools or working in product, or even technology. How different people within those three areas, and there are some adjacent areas, right? You can talk about the three-legged stool, you can talk about the table, include data into that, however you want to split that hair. But I think that there's a lot of crossover happening, and for very good reason, because while there might be an expertise and a focus, ultimately it's all about how you're building the product.
I absolutely agree. I struggle with what I call information radiation, or
Mm,
getting my findings out there across the organization
yeah,
or to other teams that you may not be working on the same problem, but someday you're going to need to know this,
for sure.
or it might help you on another project down the road.
Yeah,
We're not really great at sharing out information as we learn it because
yeah,
it's hard. I'm like, I don't want to waste your time and share all this stuff on onboarding when you are not working on that at all, right?
sure,
But it might touch your project someday.
sure,
So the solution has been we write a research report, we put it in a repository, and that is the graveyard where it dies.
sure.
And I really want to find better ways and to get this information out, because like
Yeah,
a newsletter via email, that takes a lot of effort and work, or road shows, or I don't know the solution. There's a lot of options.
yeah,
uh, when at a previous company, we would have all different researchers, data folks, market researchers, UX researchers, anybody who was collecting data. We would come together one Thursday a month, and people would share from different teams, and I
mm,
found that effective and
yeah,
useful.
yeah,
But it's also, well, like, I don't really care that you tested the usability of this button. What's that got to do with me over here in data land?
sure,
But it's also about building those relationships and having the awareness of those other people,
yeah,
is what those collective meetings I found the value of. Like, oh, we have data folks? I didn't know that. What do they do? How
right,
can I help them, or how can they help me?
yeah,
So companies are still so siloed, and they don't
yeah,
really cross pollinate like you were talking about.
yeah. I'm reminded of Lenny Richitsky had Michael Margolis on a few episodes ago, and he's over at Google Ventures, and they have this framework that they're working on over there called finding your bullseye customer. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting about their testing of what that bullseye customer might think of this prototype or this service or this thing that's been stood up to test with them is that everyone on the team actually observed and took notes during the interviews. So it was like a team event, but everyone was there and everyone was taking notes. And he did indicate, that while there are transcripts and things like that, but that AI wasn't leveraged very much in this process, because I think one of their goals is to have you'll remember a detail far more if you experience it versus if you just read it in a transcript of a note or high level summary that somebody spits out to you.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I have struggled through the years, honestly, Skipper, with the show up and throw up mentality.
Mm, sure.
I go off and do the research
Yeah.
and come back with the findings, and they're like, okay, great. I
Right.
have struggled to get them to come along with me. I still struggle with that. Hey,
Sure.
I'm busy. I've got my thing to do.
Right.
And so I admire and I'm kind of jealous of the teams who are embedded in the research like that, who
Sure.
participate and come along. It varies by team and
Yeah.
company and whatnot, but you're right. I find that it's more successful and implemented if they participate in hearing it the first time. And you'll hear like, "Oh, I remember a couple years ago when some
That's right.
user did blah blah blah." They're
Yep.
never going to read that in a transcript.
That's right.
They're never going to read that in a report. It's those little details, those meat and potatoes is what they hang on to. And I mean, I wish everybody would be as eager to do that. But I have had some product folks that are just like, nope, I'm too busy. Just go do it and bring it back to me. And it's very
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jen, if someone expressed interest in being a user researcher today, what might you suggest to them? What should they do? What should they seek out? What sort of um, what should they seek out?
You know, Skipper, that's a really tough question because harsh truth is it's a very tough time to
Yeah,
enter UX right now.
for sure.
There's a lot of students from whatever platform you learned UX or transferring from another discipline that's not UX related at all.
Sure.
And I would, my blanket gut instinct is good luck, but may not happen
Yeah.
because there's so much fierce competition for a reduced number of positions right now.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm the kind of person who's been working in UX for a long time and usually would have multiple offers when I was
Sure.
changing jobs.
Sure.
Right now, I don't feel like confident enough to that I would even have one,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah.
That is how dark. I don't know. I should be more positive, but you know, this is me. I got to be real.
Sure.
So it's a hard industry to get into. Not impossible,
Yeah.
but it's really tough. There's a lot of competition that I don't think newcomers understand just how small the pool of jobs is and
Yeah.
how much competition is swimming in that pool to get it. So not all hope is lost. I would
Yeah.
say networking is key. Getting to
Yeah.
expand your network of people you know. Understand what it is actually to be a researcher because
Yeah.
it might not be what you think. If you
Yep.
think you're like voila, here are my recommendations, and everybody takes them and runs with them, and it's a happy land.
Right.
That's not always the case.
Yeah.
So be realistic about what you're entering into. But I think what employers are looking for is real world experience,
Yeah.
a portfolio from a school or boot camp is not going to cut it to get your foot in the door anymore. I think
Yeah.
it could have maybe 5 years ago, but you're going to have to probably do some free work for a nonprofit or something like that to not just redesign an app,
Right.
really as a researcher you need to know what the problems are. You have to talk to users and you have
Yeah.
to do real research,
Yeah.
and so you're going to have to get on some probably some free projects to get some experience. I did this years ago. I was not getting experience creating personas. I know,
Mm.
God, I was like seeking out personas, crazy. But I was in the job I was in, I wasn't having the opportunity to exercise some of the skills that I wanted to develop as a UX person.
Yeah.
So I joined nonprofit Taproot, Catch a Fire. Those are some sites that you could volunteer your time to
Yeah.
get on some real projects for nonprofit organizations and get some experience. It was free on my part. That was a choice that I made, and I had the time to do that. So I appreciate not everybody does.
Yeah.
But think about how you can show how you can do the work. That's
Hmm.
what you're gonna have to do.
Yeah.
And if you think your school portfolio piece or case study is gonna do that, I'm gonna tell you it's not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. Plus one, show don't tell. I think that's really important right now. Being really clear about what you want to do, and then also being very realistic about what you can do. So yeah, those 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 points are spot on to me.
I mean, I told you I was a troublemaker. I don't like to sugarcoat stuff. I wish I was more positive and like, yes, do it. But I'm just in too many conversations. I'm seeing too many people ask, how do I get a UX job? What's that silver bullet? And hey, if I had that silver bullet,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be sitting here with you, Skipper. No offense, but I don't have the silver bullet on how to get into UX.
Yeah. So let's get into our closing questions that we do with all of our guests. Jen, what's a significant lesson that you've learned so far that you wish you would have learned earlier? It can be in your work life, in your home life. What's something that you wish you would know then what you know now?
Yes, I would say listen more and
Mm,
talk less.
mm,
I know I'm a horrible example of that because I'm running my mouth the whole time. But in research, stop talking in your
mm,
interviews. No one, you are not there to contribute your point of view or
yeah.
bias them in any way. Listen and listen with your eyes as well.
Mm,
Try to get stronger at reading people. This is something I am struggling with, always have, always want to get better. How to read the room. That's
mm,
really important. So when I say listen, I do mean listen with your ears, but I also listen with your eyes,
mm-hmm,
interpret body language and reaction, and when you're good at that, then that's when you understand I need to probe a little bit deeper on that. Don't
yeah.
glaze over those golden opportunities to understand more because you're trying to just quickly get your through your discussion guide. Really take the time to listen deeply with your ears and your eyes.
Yeah. So, what's something that you're reading or listening or watching right now that you would suggest to our listening or watching audience?
I'm not watching and reading a lot of UX stuff right now. I'm
Sure.
kind of obsessed with defining a personal brand.
Okay.
And now that could be because I've got this YouTube Blatz chats and I'm
Right.
not really sure like who the audience is and what I should do with it and what
Right.
content I should make. But I also am thinking it from a lens of somebody who wants to be employed.
Yeah.
What is their unique proposition, or what differentiates themselves from the
Mm,
rest of the pool? And so really, I really want to help others understand how to identify and promote and build your personal brand. So that's a
yeah.
lot of the things I've been reading, watching YouTube videos about, articles, that sort of thing, is what is a personal brand and how one might make that stronger.
Yeah. I've noticed on Blatz chats, you're not only doing the interviews that you've done with a variety of different kinds of people, but you're also doing book summaries. So it seems like I feel like you're doing a little bit of experimentation around what resonates with your audience. Do you have a sense of who your, to use one of the terms floating around right now, who your ideal customer profile is for the person who's your audience?
Yeah, I don't, but
Mm.
no, I'm kidding. I'd like somebody, I'd like to reach people who, not so much junior, nothing against juniors, but I think
Sure.
there's not a lot of content around middle to senior level practitioners, not
Yeah.
leaders. They're
Right.
good people
Right.
too, but they got their own thing going on. People leading is a whole different issue.
Yeah.
But I find that when you've been in your career a long time, and when I say long, 3 to 10 years, I'd say,
Sure.
you have different challenges than when you were first starting out.
Mm.
And your world around you is very different.
Yeah.
Like new people are coming in and you feel like they're better than you and you have imposter syndrome and you're like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed. I've got a million channels to monitor and learn a million things. So trying to help people, seasoned professionals, help them feel confident in their role now.
Yeah.
And I think, thinking about your personal brand and what differentiates you, what value you bring to the team and to a project is what I'm really thinking about. Could be because I'm struggling with this myself, or I'm
Mm,
seeing my peers and my colleagues and my friends like, I don't know what to do next, right?
mhm.
And next doesn't have to be my next company or I want to pivot out of a role, but I think we're in a spot where I don't know what to do next because I
Right.
don't think it's healthy to just stay in the same position for a decade and not challenge yourself and not try something new. But you've got to kind of think about like, well, what do I want to do next? And how
Yeah.
do I get into that? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about your SAC framework before, but I think there's some of what we talked about earlier in the conversation that can fold into this around what is the scenario, what are those discrete pieces that, and absolutely, there's not going to be an absolute demographic for this is the kind of person that is your ICP, but then also uh, more so, what are their motivations? What is it that they want? And whether it's to be more mostly disciplinary in the work that they do or to progress further, maybe it's to start their own business, but whatever it is, like how do you focus and give appropriate content and information to people who are looking for those different things.
Oh my God, Skipper, I need to fill out a sack for myself.
I didn't mean to give you homework, but there we go.
Thanks. As
Yeah.
if I don't have enough to do. Now you're giving me more work? Great.
That's right. So, Jen, you've already made a little bit of a prediction, but where can people find out more about you, what you do? Um, I, I, we've talked about Blatz chats a couple of times, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Sure. Obviously, Blatz chats. You never know what hot mess is going to come out of that channel. So let's see how that goes. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I post my own point of views. I share a lot of content that others have written and I find valuable. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me and follow me and see what I'm putting out there in the world.
Yeah. Well, Jen, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a wide-ranging conversation and also very informative. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And that's it for this episode of the How This Works show. We appreciate your support. Subscribe so you don't miss out. And until next time, remain ever curious, and we'll talk again soon.